if you go to your bank to take out a loan, what they don't do is wait until 400 Mrs. Miggins are paid in their savings and then take that money and give it to you.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. If you go and take a debt, they basically just create that money as a liability. They give
For
it to
themselves?
you. Yep.
Right.
So private banks can create money.
Right, okay.
So therefore, money is debt in our system. So there's the sort of original level of core money and there's a total amount of debt. What that means is that it is mathematically impossible to pay off all the debt that exists in the world.
Right.
And it's worse than that. It's not really practically possible to pay the interest on all this debt without creating more debt.
For the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by.
Hello, and welcome to Laurence Fox Show. Now, you may or may not have noticed that there's a cost of living crisis taking place, and you now need about 5 of these to fill up your average family car. So I want to talk about the future of money this week. So I've invited Dan Tubb, who's an investor, on to explain things to me, but that I'm much too stupid to understand. Dan, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you tell us, our viewers, a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So like you said, now I'm a private investor, but before that I spent the last 20 years in venture capital, and I spent that looking at emerging technologies and digital trends.
Right, okay. So this is a social construct as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely right.
Right, so it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £20. What is this? What is money?
Yeah, so that line is interesting. I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum. For the longest time, money was something tangible. It's gold and silver. For thousands of years, that was the case. However, something significant changed at the end of the Second World War. Through circumstances, the US ended up with all of the gold. And that's partly because it was the functional economy that was exporting and earning it, but also it's because a lot of countries used it to safe haven their gold. And the Americans, they decided, but they didn't particularly want to give it all back again.
So this was, sorry to interrupt you straight away because I'm thick, was that, after the Second World War, this is the end of the gold standard, is that correct? Is that what it was or not?
Not quite,
No.
but it was the beginning of the end of the gold standard.
Okay.
Because what they said is, okay, we're going to have a new system where dollars are interchangeable for gold. So you don't need to worry that all the gold is safe havened here. Now, actually, that does kind of make sense because you can pull cons with gold. You can drill into the bar and you can put stuff into it. So it makes sense to have it all in a single location where it's verified, and then you just move it around between different vaults for nations, and therefore you use the dollars instead. Mm. So there was a sense to the system. And it worked quite well for, several decades, until about 1971. Then what happened is people started to become concerned that the US was spending more than they had any right to. And people became nervous about having their gold stored there. And this triggered a crisis. And the way that President Nixon responded to that crisis was to say that he was going to break the link between dollars and gold. So now, dollars were literally just pieces of paper. But it was okay because everybody had faith in the system. There were some upsets while that system bedded down, but from that point on, paper, money came into existence. Now that sort of unlocked a couple of new abilities for money. The most significant was that governments can now deficit finance.
What does that mean?
It means that they can raise revenues of that much, and they can spend at that much, and they can make up the difference with debt.
Got you.
Now that's brilliant for politicians, because of course they can make all sorts of promises, vote for me and I'll spend this on you, while not actually having the money to do that.
Is that a little bit like the magic money tree?
Yeah.
So,
It's more like a Ponzi scheme, really.
Yeah, which the magic money tree seems to be to me.
Now, absolutely, the politicians, they quite like that system, obviously.
Yeah.
And you might think the next guy wouldn't like that system because he's being handed the debt of the previous chap. But actually he doesn't mind it either because he can just roll over that debt and add his own debt on top of it. And it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And that's been the case since 1971. So as you can imagine, you roll that forward several decades and that debt really starts to accumulate.
30 trillion or something, isn't it, in America at the moment?
Yeah, well, there's two different ways you can measure it. You can measure the absolute debt, but then you can also add in the unfunded liabilities.
Right.
So what I mean by that is they have promised, say, Medicare to people years and years out, and there's other promises they've made to people. If you look at the promises that they've made, divided by the number of people, you're looking at something like 500,000 debt per individual.
In America?
Yeah, in America. So if you go to US Debt Clock or something like that, you get a whole load of stats. Go to the bottom right-hand corner.
So 350 million people in America all owe, if every deal was to be settled tomorrow and every debt was to be paid, every single 350 million people in America would need to pay 500 grand.
Yes.
That's worrying, isn't it? That's just a slightly concerning situation to be.
That would bring it level. But of course, they're still deficit financing. So that
who do they owe the money to? They're just printing more money, essentially. Is that right?
Well, that's the whole thing. Who do they owe the money to? Now, in the past, it would have been individuals would have bought that debt. Then it was other nations would have bought that debt. The US found an ingenious system to make anybody who wanted to buy energy in the world buy their debt. Although we could be starting to enter a phase where the US Treasury have to buy their own debt, and that's
which, as far as I understand, they are doing, aren't they? But does that mean because obviously in England we're getting a massive inflation coming, which is the robber in the house. Is the inflation a result of fear in the system? Of that the system might collapse?
Well, no, it's because the amount of money has increased.
Because we printed all the money during lockdowns and stuff. What did England?
I mean, that's part of it. But the other part of it is I said that they unlocked a couple of new abilities. One was deficit finance. The other one was they effectively
What's deficit finance?
Well, it's that where they can spend that much and they can raise revenues at a lower level and make up the difference.
Yeah.
The other ability they unlocked was essentially to make money debt. Now, a really simplistic explanation of that is if I gave you £100. You wouldn't care whether I'd saved up that money or if I had borrowed it. From your point of view, it spends exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's a sort of overly simplistic way. Another way of looking at it is to say, if you go to your bank to take out a loan, what they don't do is wait until 400 Mrs. Miggins are paid in their savings and then take that money and give it to you.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. If you go and take a debt, they basically just create that money as a liability. They give it to
themselves.
Yep.
Right.
So private banks can create money.
Right. Okay.
So therefore, money is debt in our system. So there's the sort of original level of core money and there's a total amount of debt. What that means is that it is mathematically impossible to pay off all the debt that exists in the world.
Right.
And it's worse than that. It's not really practically possible to pay the interest on all this debt without creating more debt.
Of course.
So you get into this situation where debt just grows and grows and grows. You get to that situation like we talked about where everyone in the US, and including retired people and babies, owe 500,000. You also get into the situation, well, I think world debt is something like 400% of GDP.
World debt is?
World debt, 400% of GDP.
So, I mean, it really is a social construct then. It's it doesn't mean anything, almost. So why? So it does the whole thing rely on confidence, essentially. So if you're in a period of now that we've got a cost of living crisis, what is driving the cost of living crisis in the UK?
So this is where it gets interesting because you can assign different reasons to it. So we pick an example of, say, energy in a minute, but the core thing is going to be that if you look at the total amount of pound notes, so the total amount of sterling that existed, we call this M2, the money supply. You look at that 10 years ago, it was about 2 trillion.
In sterling?
Yep.
Right.
Today it's 3 trillion. So an extra trillion has been printed over the last 10 years.
How much is a trillion? 1,000 billion?
Yeah.
Right. So, well, if an extra trillion has been done in the last 10 years, and half of that has been done in the last 18 months.
Yeah. Well, actually, most of it was done at the beginning of the lockdown period.
Right. So has that had an effect? What I think I'm trying to ask is, has the lockdown had an effect on? Is the lockdown the primary cause of inflation?
I would say that the money printing is the primary cause.
So he printed £1 billion a day. And we're now up to £500 billion quid, I imagine. So is that what's fundamentally driving inflation?
So if anything, it was the other way around. The lockdown was useful as a mechanism to be able to say why we are doing all this money printing. So it was more convenient in that case. But yes, obviously, if you create more money, you've got more money chasing the same number of goods and services.
Right.
So it's going to go up. So I mean, you've probably seen this
So
effect.
then the price, so you got more, sorry, just I'm so thick about money, and then forgive me. So you put more money into the system, you've got more money looking for a bottle of milk or a litre of fuel, and therefore the price of fuel is going to rise as a result of that. But you were saying to me that inflation, before you said inflation is actually quite good for governments. In a way, it's obviously terrible for us lot who now have to spend 100 quid filling up a...
Yeah, so let's address that by going through the cost of living crisis.
Okay.
So inflation is up because there's more money in the system chasing things.
Yeah.
Now, when the money washes through the system, it hits things at different speed. So if you look back to 2020, you will notice that financialized assets, so stock markets, traded commodities, they shot up straight away. They respond very, very quickly to more money being injected into the system.
They're happy about that.
Yeah. Then it starts washing through the various layers. So then it starts going to things like land and property. It goes to other things like commodities, timber, all those sort of things. Eventually, the inflation washes through to wages. But that takes a long time, and you never get a sort of one-for-one adjustment in your wages to match the amount of money increase. So that's why people get poorer over time. So
sorry, go back over that. So the inflation in wages will essentially come a long way down the line. So you've got the stock market, whoopee, money, great, brilliant. That goes all the way through every other system, and the last person it ends up with is your wage packet. But it is not an equal distribution. The amount of inflation to your wages will be substantially less than the amount that the stock market makes. So that's why you become poorer.
Yeah, so think about it as a conveyor belt, and this conveyor belt starts at the Bank of England, and all the financial firms are all clustered around it, and the money comes out there. Everybody grabs their piece, especially the financial sector. They're very good at it. And then it goes through the sort of commodity producers, and it goes through the retailers and the business, and eventually the wage earner is right at the end of the conveyor belt, and there's not much left on it for him when he gets to that point. So that explains why, perhaps our parents' generation, you could have somebody who, not even necessarily a professional career, it could just be a skilled craftsman of some sort who could easily support a family in a family home on a single wage. And he could reasonably expect to pay off his mortgage in a short period of time.
Period or something, yeah.
That's obviously not the case today.
No, I mean you can't. That's why I don't understand, because nowadays, what is it? The price of a house, the average price of a house is 20,000 more than what you can afford on your
I think the key
salary.
thing is, I don't remember these numbers offhand, but the ratio between your salary and the house price and it used to be something like a couple of years' salary, and now obviously it's up to many multiples. I mean, if you live in London, you might be paying 10, 12 times your salary to get into something. That's assuming that you can save up for the deposit in the first place.
Yeah, that's horrendous. So all right, so we need to get on to, I need to go back to what inflation is. Why is inflation good for governments?
Okay, so because we have this cost of living crisis and we see prices going up across the board, a lot of people are going to have either personal or cultural memory of a period, say like the 1970s when inflation was high.
Yeah.
And the way it was tackled then was interest rates were put up, because that makes, it makes people less likely to go out and borrow money and stimulate and so on, so there's less money washing through the system. It slows everything down. So a lot of people will think, especially if they remember the 70s, they're going to say, cost of living crisis, I know what to do, put the interest rates up, that will settle it. That's not going to happen. It's different this time. The reason it's different this time is because back in the 70s, it was individual and corporations who owned that debt. These days, it's the government who owns the debt. They are not going to bankrupt themselves. In the 70s, they were perfectly fine taking the tough financial medicine and just saying, well, sucks to be you, and if you get wiped out, you get wiped out. They're not going to do that to themselves, obviously.
No.
So, I mean, what interest rates
they're
now?
inflating the price of stuff to reduce the size of their debt. Is that right?
Well, if you have a debt which is expressed as a fixed number,
yeah,
and then you get inflation of whatever it is, 10% a year, over many years, you can effectively halve or even more the real value of that debt.
Right.
So, give an example. I know an older couple bought a house for 30 grand 30 years ago, and they did an interest-only mortgage. They never paid anything off until they got to the end. Now, when they took out that 30 grand mortgage, that was a big amount of money. 30 years later, that's not a big amount of money anymore. I mean, the house is now worth, I don't know, a lot more than that. So, I mean, worst case scenario, they could sell the house and buy something slightly smaller and easily pay off that debt. That's what happens to debt over time.
Right.
Exactly the same with government debt as well. It just gets smaller and smaller and smaller over time. Now, I mentioned that today the government are the ones with the debt problem.
Yeah.
And this is a situation that we've had from that deficit financing. It's also partially as a result of the 2008 crisis, where rather than have, 2008, we could have had a depression in the 2010s and cleared all of this problem out. They decided not to do that. They basically took the problem up the extra level to the sovereign, to the government level. And now this debt is at that sovereign level, and that cannot be allowed to fail. Well, they would not allow that to fail.
Okay. So what happens?
What they want to do is they want to reduce the real value of that debt that they've got sat with them. And they don't really have any good options left. The only thing they can really do is run inflation basically as high as they can, 1% below the level that it causes a revolution. And if you do that for long enough, that will then reduce the value of the debt. But of course, that's going to be a problem because,
when people are out of pocket, they hit the streets.
well, the average guy is going to get screwed.
So and it's obviously screwing the people whose lives are completely dependent on the fact that they've got very little wiggle room, which is the poor. That's right. So
Yeah.
Okay. So then you hear Rishi Sunak. And, I've got a little crypto thing on my phone, my Coinbase. You'd probably tell me that's the wrong one, I know. But anyway, I've got it and I watch it sort of go up and down. And I thought I'll put a little bit of money in and I enjoy looking at it. And then I hear Rishi Sunak going, he's going to bring in a Bitcoin. Is that related to this in any way?
Yeah, it is actually. So,
and also, the other thing that sorry for being, and, call me a conspiracy theorist, this determination to bring in what they called a vaccine passport, which essentially seems to me to be a digital ID. So can you talk me through what the government, with no options left, are going to do now?
Yeah, one does kind of lead on to the other. Now, digital IDs, that's very interesting. There is a strong international push to get that happening. So, you may remember, I think it was in 2001, Tony Blair tried to bring in ID cards.
Oh, that lovely man.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I'm really... Oh, sorry, I just had a little wash of nostalgia for Tone. Oh, what a tour.
Things can only get better.
For me and the Tony Blair Foundation. Not for profit. I'm paying myself £2.5 million a year. Yes, anyway, sorry.
So he tried to get that through, but there was a big pushback from the British people. We didn't want it. He couldn't succeed with that.
Why don't we want it? Because we're Brits and we've got a sort of border anyway, and we're sort of pretty chuffed with being Brits. And
the argument at the time was, the argument at the time was something like, "Are you prepared to arrest little old ladies who go to the shop without their ID card? If you're not, then basically it's just an extra burden on the middle class."
But was it? But when they tried to bring it in during the pandemic, do you think that was their? Do you think they used the pandemic to bring it in, or do you think they genuinely thought,
I can give you some potential evidence on that. So the push for digital IDs was occurring well before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I would point you to an organisation called ID 2020. That was, despite the name, that was actually founded in 2016.
Right.
It was founded with seed money from various organisations, including some of the big auditors, the Rockefeller Foundation, Microsoft, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Oh, hang on a minute. I'm getting another flush, a warm flush. Bill. Oh, Bill Gates.
And Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, in 2016.
So this was, okay. Wow.
They subsequently released papers saying, and you can check this out, that a future pandemic would be very useful for spreading digital IDs.
Yeah.
So just make sure that I didn't, turn that around. It's not that digital IDs will be good in combating a pandemic. A pandemic will be good for spreading digital IDs.
Right.
So another data point.
Can I just quickly ask, is that too controversial to go out on YouTube? Probably, isn't it? Are YouTube going to get upset?
Let's deal with that in the edit.
No, because
I don't think.
essentially, guys, what I'm trying to say is every time we try and have a normal conversation, YouTube give us a hard strike. And you're basically just trying to dig out some information so that we can all be a bit better informed, you know.
So there is nothing that I've said that you cannot...
So this is factually true, that Gabby and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, all of this stuff, they said in 2016... When
So
I
will send Alex a whole series of links, and he will be able to throw up on the screen a headline or basically the ID 2020 webpage.
Yeah.
He will be... So, and this, I'm about to talk about Davos, and so I'll try and do it as carefully as I can.
No, I
Again,
don't want it.
everything-
I want all of this in, this
Yeah.
whole conversation in, so it's fine. The point is... So let's just go back. 2016, they started this thing called ID 2020, and they stated that a pandemic of any kind would be a useful opportunity to bring in digital IDs. And our dear friend Klaus Schwab, who's running the World Economic Forum, is really keen on all of this stuff. He needs to get a new costume, but that's beside the point. Okay, back to there.
Okay, and the second data point is going to be the Davos event that world leaders attend every
Where
year.
Klaus Schwab does his
That's
book
the one.
reading thing. Yes, very good, yes.
So in 2018, the theme of that event was digital IDs. Nobody needs to take my word for this. You can go on to the World Economic Forum YouTube page, and they've got all the speeches. And
Why does Klaus want us all to have a digital ID? So you're going to tell me, aren't you? Yeah.
I can give you some of the stated reasons, and I can speculate beyond that. But one of the interesting things to come out of that 2018 Davos meeting was a policy paper. From memory, it's called something like Digital IDs, a New Social Contract. And if you go to the World Economic Forum, you type that in, you will get that policy document that comes up.
They blocked me.
Right, okay. That was basically a policy document that gave governments a series of initiatives to go off and deliver on. Dutifully, I note that all the governments did go off and start delivering on that policy agenda.
So why did Boris, oh fearless one, Boris, go from saying I'd rather chew and eat an ID, swallow my ID, to going we love them?
So
Did he have a little trip to Davos?
yeah, you
Or
can make arguments for all of these things. So look, let's make the argument for the last thing, that the debt levels going up and the inflation and so on. It sounds really sinister, doesn't it? But you could present it to a government minister. You could say, if we don't do this, then the government is going to collapse and we're not going to be able to pay pensions.
But there's a £3 trillion pension pot, is there not?
Well, no, actually, the way it works is that you pay money into the system and it goes immediately out to pay pensions at the time. You don't save up your pension through the system.
Right.
It's then waiting for you.
Okay.
So you can make the argument...
Or
that-
not.
Yeah. You can make the argument these things have to be done.
Yeah.
When it comes to digital IDs, again, you can make arguments for them. You can say...
Give me a good argument for a digital ID.
Well, convenience, protect your identity. So those are ones. So identity theft is something that happens, and if you've got a government issued digital ID, it makes it harder. And the convenience thing is that it will tie together all government services. So for example, if you've got any vehicles licensed to you, that can go on it. Your MOT status, that can be linked to it. Your GP records, your tax records,
I said
all of
give
these.
me a good reason. I want a good reason, Dan, not a... Well, the government can know absolutely everything about everything you do.
Yeah. Where I start to get concerned is when it starts to go beyond those limited government functions. So, for example, and I mentioned that this came out of Davos 2018. The governments were given their instructions to go and weigh on work on this. And actually, if you want to go to the government webpage, you can just type in digital identity next steps, and you can see that they are working through this. They are following that.
Why
that
are they
policy
listening
proposal.
to what Klaus wants? Why is everyone jumping on a jet plane going over
So
to
that's a
Davos?
question I can't answer. Why are they following this agenda? All I can tell you is that they are following this agenda. They are demonstrably following this agenda.
Yeah.
Now, where I start to get concerned is when you go to the next step on some of this stuff.
Okay.
So France is also working on a digital ID system, and they've said that social media accounts are going to have to tie into this digital ID.
Yeah.
That's a very easy requirement to make. So,
But you could upgrade your social credit score by surrendering, like all the
well,
French
this
do.
is where it starts to come on to. So, if governments start to push or governments start to require that every time you have an internet service provider account or a social media account or an email account or a messaging account, you have to link it to your government ID, that basically gives government the ability to see everything you do, who you communicate with and what your political views are.
But aren't they doing that already? I mean, I could call me cynical, but I think the government know everything you have ever produced digitally anyway, and that they, you know, I'm convinced that they look into things, you know.
So companies like Google certainly do have that information.
Yeah, well, they do, because you have two different. You know, if I sat next to, you know, Johnny Liberal with the blue hair and the BLM kneeling, and we both Googled the same thing, we would get different results from Google, don't they? They have an algorithm.
Yeah.
They're it's. What I'm trying to say is, are we not already? Is it not already in existence?
So
it's just not
that is one of
formally?
the arguments for this stuff, is that because this information is known anyway, what does it matter if government have it as well? I would push back on that, say, if I want to, I can de-Google. I can get a third-party phone. You know, Apple and Microsoft, for their faults, they get very little revenue from selling data, whereas Google, that's their entire business model. So, and you can go further. You can go to Linux-based systems or whatever you want to do. So you can opt out of Google if you want to. You won't be able to opt out of a government ID. You know, that would be a requirement. And my bigger concern is that it's a very small step from a digital ID to a social credit system.
Yeah.
Now, that shouldn't be surprising, because we've actually already had a social credit system in this country. It was a very basic one. It was very simple, but it was a social credit system, and that was the vaccine passport.
Yeah.
The social bit is, are you vaccinated? Yes or no. So there was a single flag on that, and the credit bit was, you know, if you had it, you could travel easier. And I think there was some other stuff. I mean, I try to block all of this out during this whole period, but, you know, it's easy attending large events and so on.
Yeah.
So we've already crossed the Rubicon. We've already had a social credit system. So it shouldn't be that surprising that we could have one again in the future, only with more conditions set on it.
Yeah.
Now,
So
I don't think that the government would introduce that on day one.
No, they never introduce anything evil
No.
on day one, don't they? They squeeze you dry first.
But that's not the concern. The concern is that a digital ID is only ever one software update away from becoming a social credit system. You can flip from one to the other very fast. It is simply a political choice, a bit of programming, and a software update, and you now have a social credit system.
Yeah.
So I think the question you want to be asking is, even if you trust this government, even if you trust
Sorry,
the opposition,
I don't.
okay, you may not, but even if you
Or
did,
the opposition, or the Lib Dems.
the question is, are you happy with your worst political enemy having this power? And it doesn't matter whether your worst political enemy is Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn or Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or Laurence Fox. It doesn't matter who your worst political enemy is. If you are not happy with that person having this power over you at any future point, whenever they decide to turn it on, then no one should have this power.
Yeah, that's fair and equitable. That makes sense to me. Yeah. Also, then, you know, obviously they have it in China, don't they? You know, if your social credit score is bad, you can't take trains and flights and various places. So you're becoming trapped, and then you're reading. You know, I read in Bloomberg yesterday. I know, going back to the inflation stuff, they're like, you know, you plebs need to use the bus more often and eat meat. Oh, is Sadiq doing it as well? Yeah. Well, I mean, Sadiq might as well have I love Klaus Schwab tattooed on his head.
So China is a great example, because what they are able to do now is they are able to shut down dissidents before they even protest. Because they know what your political views are, they know who you're communicating with, so they will stop you buying a train ticket to go to a city to protest, and various other means to basically to get you to not protest in the first place. If a government were to abuse this, and again, I'm not saying
Which they always do.
Eventually, that's a strong possibility. So even if you trust this government, some future government could abuse this. Now, what would that mean if we applied it retrospectively? It would mean no suffragettes. It would have meant no decriminalisation of homosexuality. In the US, it would have meant no civil rights movement. Now, some people might say, look, you're being dramatic. Those things happened in the past. We have now reached the end of history. We are now fully enlightened.
I'm really enjoying the end of history. It's been a real blast these last 2 years.
And you don't need to worry because governments these days are lawful good and they're not going to do anything wrong. Well, I can give you recent examples. So only a few years ago, there was the Iraq war protests.
Yeah.
Now-
Tax riots.
The globalists, they got their war. But the point is that people were able to speak up against
When
it.
you say the globalists, they got their war, I see this said quite a lot, that war is a really good way of dealing with a money crisis.
That's quite a deep topic, so
Right.
should we put a pin in that one and
All right,
potentially come back
we'll
to it?
discuss that later in the 17-hour conversation that we have as to whether war is a way of laundering money. But there we are.
Another recent example would be the Windrush Scandal. Now, of course, on that one, the government did back down. The simple point I'm making is that in a future where government has this much control, or the potential to have this much control, they do not need to back down.
Because they will have acted in advance anyway.
Because they will be able to shut down things that they don't want to hear.
Okay, but then why? I believe that we are at possibly the lowest ebb that we've ever had in trust, generally. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of online people are relating online, but I don't think it's me. It's a lot of people I speak to, and yes, I do speak to people who have differing views from me. Traditional left-wing people as well, and they say that there is a fundamental breakdown in trust between the public and the government. They don't trust what the government tell them, and they don't trust what the media, who they just feel is the government's propaganda arm, tell them. So how do those things interact? A complete lack of trust in your rulers, and then them trying to bring in these things.
So I think you've got to look at the other side of that coin.
Okay.
We don't trust the politicians, and the reason is they don't trust us.
Ah, got you. Good, yeah.
And you can understand why. So we talked about the necessity of the debt situation is that they need to run inflation really hot for quite a long time in order to get that debt down. So they know that we are going to become more difficult over the coming decade. You just talked about the trust element. You can understand why they would want a powerful tool in their arsenal, such as a digital ID that could be upgraded to a social credit system at any time. But there's another potential mechanism of control that they would quite like, and that's the central bank digital currency.
Oh God, it gives me the shivers just thinking about the central bank digital currency. All right, I'm going to tell you what I think central bank digital currency is, and then you're going to tell me what it really is. So, as far as I understand, a central bank digital currency means that the government are totally in control of your money. This is what my sort of nightmare scenario is. They say, don't worry, chaps, you're getting paid 500 quid a week. We'll swap that for a Bitcoin, that 500 quid a week. But then I think about what abuses that could take place. So they could go, you've got Bitcoin, but obviously you can't. I know you love sirloin steak or you like McDonald's, but
they can limit you.
You can't do that. We're not allowing you to spend. You go in and they go, sorry, you don't have enough Bitcoin for that. Or at the end of the week, they could go, you know what, you've got to spend that 500 quid this week, so you're not allowed to ever save or give anything to your children ever again. And we're basically turning into hens waiting for this little tray to go past. We go, boom, oh, thank you, Mr. Government, for my money. Is that? So
it's all of that. So basically,
dramatic?
what a central bank digital does is it clears out the retail banks. Those are no longer involved in the process. The central bank has a digital record of all the money. At the moment, that is spread across a whole number of institutions, Lloyds, Halifax, whatever. It's all over the place. Bring it all to the central bank, and you would have a wallet registered at the central bank that you could access through your phone or laptop or whatever it was.
Which we kind of already. I'm sorry to interrupt, but every time I pay for that, I try and pay in cash as much as possible because it just annoys me. But if you forget your thing and you go in and you buy a supermarket shop and you click your phone and you stare at it, you're going, okay, so I'm doing facial recognition technology. I'm telling Apple where I'm shopping. I'm telling them what I'm buying. So it's kind of already happening. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I get that a lot. So it may look like we have digital money at the moment. What we don't really. What we have at the moment is what I described just there, which was each individual bank is the record keeper for your money. So if you keep your money at Barclays, they are the record keeper for your money.
Right.
And actually the whole global monetary system works like that. Each financial player has their own records. And actually the way it works is they all report back to one central hub and they say, well, we think that X owes Y this and A owes B this and so on. Yeah. And everybody's records tally up and that is basically money. It's an agreed ledger. That's effectively what it is. With a central bank digital currency, all of that is stripped away, and you just have the central banks are the only nodes in this, and they keep the record. So it is different because it's all clustered around a central point. At the moment, if the government wants to take your money away, it needs to go and get a warrant, and it needs to go to your bank. If it wants to see what you're spending money on, again, it's got to get a warrant and go to your bank. There's extra steps involved. With the central bank digital currency, because it's theirs, because they have it all, they will see every single transaction you make. So the kindest thing you can say about a central bank digital currency is that it is complete surveillance. Everything they see. Now again, let's play devil's advocate. Let's make an argument on behalf of government as to why they'd want to do this.
Yeah.
If you've got a tax rate, whatever it is, and you are only seeing 80% of transactions that happen in your economy, you can only tax 80%.
Yeah.
With a central bank digital currency, they will be able to tax 100%. So they will be able to say, look, we are getting our fair share of taxes.
You could increase GDP by a percentage and have more money to spend on hospitals and things like that.
That would be the sort of argument.
Yeah.
But as you've alluded to, it is again very easy to abuse this technology. So you can make it programmable. You can say that in order to combat climate change, you're limited to one flight a year.
Yeah.
And if you go,
Sadiq would love that, wouldn't he?
and if you fly a second time, the tax doubles on it. If you fly a third time, the tax doubles again. They could say, in order to combat climate
I
change,
kind of want to bring it in just to piss off Piers Morgan.
yeah,
There
perhaps
you
you do
go,
that.
Piers.
And look, your example about buying red meat. Exactly, they could decide to limit the amount you spend on that, or tobacco, or whatever it is you want to spend your money in.
They can't take away my tobacco. I'm really addicted.
Well, with this technology, they potentially can. You would go to the counter, you would try to pay, and it wouldn't let you.
Is it active though? Are they actively just going, we want to control the citizenry, or is it inevitable? Is there so you've got things like Bitcoin now and various things in this distributed ledger, which and blockchain. Again, stuff I say, but I don't really understand what it means. So if you don't want to become one of those shrimps from that lives in giant swarms until a big blue whale comes and gets you. If you don't just want to be that and you want to be an individual and you want to have a life, how do you fight back against being krill?
So I actually believe that it's not intentionally sinister.
Right.
I think that actually these innovations are a long way off at the moment. So the digital IDs, they are being actively worked on, and that will probably be with us in a few years, but it is going to take them a while to get to it. And the central bank digital currency, that's even further behind, and it's going to come along.
So what would be your guess in timings?
Digital ID could be with us in 3 to 5 years. Digital currency, well, it would probably take them closer to 10 years to get that off the ground, but I don't know, I could be wrong, it could be sooner than that.
Yeah.
I'm less concerned that they're doing it with sinister reasons in mind. What I'm saying is it is so easy to do something sinister when you have this much power.
Yeah, centralised
And
power.
my concern is that some future government may do this. And this is why I go to my point about if you are not happy with your worst political enemy having this power, then nobody should have this power. And it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that is, and it is a
along the
very important point, isn't it? Because people should disagree and all of that we should be allowed to.
Yeah. And look, so how can we push back on it? So at an absolute minimum, what we've got to be doing while this stuff is in the development stage, we need to be having a conversation and highlighting the dangers of what could be done with it. If this is going to happen, I think we need strong, almost constitutional level safeguards in place. Look, even if we had constitutional level safeguards...
Well, like a financial constitution, rather, because Britain, you're never going to get a written constitution in Britain, are you? But
No,
you
but
could have a financial constitution. I mean, I'm sure there's financial regulations and all that in existence, but we will never do X or Y.
I mean, of course, they can change that with an act of parliament, but...
like the fact that we were all free and then we turned into China, and
Yeah.
2 years ago yesterday.
So I wouldn't be... So the lowest level of protection is that the bill that they introduced this on, they also introduced protections in that same bill. That's the lowest level of protection. Above that would be something like a Bill of Rights, where they say, this we will not do, or this we cannot do, this the power we cannot have. Another level of protection about that level would be when you design these things in the first place, you do not make them programmable. So you don't make your central bank programmable, so you can't filter out people's flights or whatever it is.
So hang on a minute. How can you make a central bank digital currency not programmable?
Well, I suppose they can re-engineer anything, but you don't build that in as a functionality from day one.
So the only functionality that to stop it being programmable is you swap £1 for one Bitcoin, and that's it. It's yours. It exists for you, but it comes.
So they don't start with the ability to freeze out transactions or do whatever.
But that's
else.
never going to happen because human nature is fundamentally pretty crap, sadly.
Yeah, and like I say, a future government can bring it in if they want to.
Yeah.
What I actually think would be the best level of protection would be if we allowed multiple options. So imagine this future. In the crypto space at the moment, they are working on digital IDs. It's a bit weird. They're called NFTs.
Yeah, non-fungible tokens.
Yeah, non-fungible tokens. And at the moment, they're being used to exchange JPEGs, and it's all a bit silly.
Yeah, I don't really understand. It's like someone bought Jack Dorsey's first tweet.
Yeah.
That lovely. Oh, another warm rush of happiness comes over me.
Don't worry about that. That's a whole bunch of silliness that's just going on while this technology is emerging. What NFTs will actually do is they are a method of identifying something unique in the digital space. So basically, that could be used for an ID system in the future.
So, like, if I did a drawing and I sold
No,
it,
forget the JPEGs.
No.
It's just digital information.
Right, and that's
And that could be an identity. So look, you could imagine a future where there are multiple digital identities, and you own most of them. So you could have a digital identity, which is, this proves who I am. You can interact with me by email or messenger or on some future digital platform, and I vouch that you are actually speaking to the person who you think you are talking to. There is a need for something like that in the future.
yeah. So that's be person to person, peer to peer stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you could have a situation in the future where you could own multiple IDs. So you could have one that you use for work. You could have another identity that you own that you use in your private life for, I don't know, dating or whatever it is. You could have another identity which is anonymous that you use for online gaming or something like that. And in that mix, you could also have a government ID, and you use that one to interact with government services and stuff. If that was the future, I'd be relatively relaxed because there is a multitude of different options, and you own most of them apart from the government one, but you only ever use that when you're interacting.
You only ever use that to buy like gym memberships and locusts.
Well, hopefully not even that. You would only use the government one for interacting with explicitly government services. So that would be your MOT, your GP records, your tax, something like that.
And then everything else is like, so it's like having a load of different credit cards. You can go, when I get it, I understand it.
And a whole bunch of different, you use it for other stuff. Okay. Same with the money as well. I would be a lot more comfortable because I think we are going to get both a digital ID and I think we're also going to get a central bank digital currency. I would be a lot more comfortable with a central bank digital currency if it was one of a number of choices.
Yeah.
So if they had a digital currency, but they also retain cash. And they also allowed you to use other digital currencies outside of that system. They probably can't stop you from using other digital currencies. But if
why not?
So take Bitcoin. That is the sort of the money equivalent to. Do you remember the file sharing when? Well, not us obviously, but other people would exchange music online. They couldn't shut it down. It's not possible to shut it down.
Yeah.
It's the same with Bitcoin. You would have to literally take everybody's computer away to stop them from using that. But they can make it difficult. I mean, they can add penalties. But if you had a future where they explicitly allowed other digital currencies that you could use if you wanted to, you could have the official UK currency that they use, and you had cash as well. Then that would be a future that I'm a lot more comfortable with because it gives people that choices and it doesn't give government that ultimate power. Okay, is that what's happening?
No. So,
to start off with, central bank digital currencies were officially denied. That's when I first started really talking. When they officially denied them, that's when I really started to raise the temperature on this stuff and say you've got to watch out for this.
Yeah.
Subsequently, it's been admitted, yes, we are working on this. Rishi Sunak put out a LinkedIn post in which he explained his plans. And he said, yes, we're working on exploring central bank digital currencies, but you don't need to worry because it is going to be, like I described, one of a mix. We're not going to do anything with cash. Okay, so we've got to take him at his word. Interesting point. Partygate. Allegra Stratton has to resign. She comes out onto Downing Street. She gives that tearful address.
Then starts talking about cash.
Yeah, she starts talking about all the things that she's proud of having worked on. One of them was the abolition of cash. That wasn't in the manifesto.
Well, the Australians are removing ATMs, aren't they?
Yeah, so...
And this whole... So is it... This is essentially... Everyone's flown into Davos. They've left and, Klaus is really happy that Justin Trudeau's now, the whole cabinet is full of it and all of this stuff. Australia is removing cash points. Everyone is saying the words build back better in lockstep. The fourth industrial revolution is coming, and the defence against the fourth industrial revolution is to have a diversity of options. But we are essentially heading down that way. The thing is, again, just sort of wrapping it up in a way, with the destruction of trust, it's just unprecedented what has happened to us in the last couple of years. So some people, apply that rule that never ascribe to malice what you can just easily ascribe to stupidity. But this feels very sinister to me. So, what should our message to the people who are watching this? What should our message be to them?
So, I think you're right to hit upon the Great Reset stuff.
Yeah.
Got my copy here. COVID-19 Great Reset.
I've got my copy over there. Have I? I like to read it.
None of this is a conspiracy. You can go on Amazon and you can get this.
Really boring, by the way.
It is. I think a lot of people on our side of the freedom
Stakeholder
debate...
capitalism, ESG. So ESG is what they're going to do to business, to destroy business, and diversity, equity and inclusion is what they're going to do to destroy culture.
But it's effectively
I hate you, Klaus.
It's effectively a corporate social credit system. But I think a lot of people on our side of the freedom debate misunderstand what the Great Reset is all about.
Okay.
A lot of people
please,
are not...
I'm already close to going outside and, over the edge. So please tell me what the Great Reset is about, and please tell me it's not too bad.
That's the good news.
Great.
It's not actually too bad. So a lot of people on our side of the freedom debate, they think that the Great Reset is all about crashing the financial system. It's not that at all.
Right.
The financial system is going to crash.
It's already crashed.
The financial system...
crashing the financial system. That's all. We're already screwed on that one, chum. Cheer up, chin up.
The financial system is going to crash all by itself because of the reasons we've already talked about. The Great Reset is nothing more sinister than making sure that the people who caused it get to be rich and powerful on the other side.
But they've already done really well on that one, haven't they? During lockdown, if you're a billionaire, you're worth a lot more than you were before, and if you're little plebs like the rest of them.
When the big crash comes, there is a danger that the people who are wealthy and powerful now lose that wealth and power. The Great Reset is simply...
That's good. I'd like them to lose it.
The Great Reset is simply an agenda to make sure that the control mechanisms are in place, that when that comes, they remain wealthy and powerful.
Well, I suppose that makes sense, doesn't it? So it's not okay. Because when I look at the Great Reset, all I hear is you will own nothing and you will be happy. The elites will fly around. I just imagine us walking along, desperately hungry, looking up at the sky and seeing these planes going over and saying to our children, our children going, my dad went on one of those once. Stuff like that. It just feels so. Essentially, what they're doing, the richest people on earth, is making sure that they can protect all of the money that they've got.
Yeah, it's simply a wealth and power thing. They are making sure that they have the control
money
mechanisms.
And power. That's the thing. Yeah. Well, I'm off to top myself because it's extremely depressing. But it's really good to know what's going on, and thank you for explaining it. I've got you a present. Where's my present for you? Oh, yeah. Look.
Oh.
It's a reclaim badge.
The reclaim badge.
You're a reclaimer.
Thank you so much for explaining it to us in such a clear and understandable way, because the thing is, I'm not stupid, but I find it really, really difficult to understand. So you've explained it in a way that I get, and I hope everyone get, and I hope it was useful to you. So thank you, Dan, so much for coming in.
Well, man.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant.